We are back with you after a weekend of lawlessness and destruction by the Trump administration, defying court orders, in straightforward violation of law, inventing constitutional arguments that have completely no precedent or basis. But today we are joined by the great Mary Kusler, Senior Director at the National Education Association Center for Advocacy and Political Action, to discuss last week's a wrecking ball to the American government and the American people. The sweeping, destructive cuts to public education that were announced by the Trump administration, by Elon Musk, huge cuts to the U.S. Department of Education. And we are so grateful to have you here, Mary, to talk about what teachers, what parents, what students are doing to push back this week. NEA has got some amazing actions planned. But first, before we dig into that, could you just give us some context of what is going on here? What have they done? Why is it so destructive? And how should Americans be thinking about this attack on public education in this really terrifying moment?
Yeah, thanks, Alex, and thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me with you all today. What we know is that a quality public education is the cornerstone of our democracy, and that our public education system should not discriminate based on background, based on location, based on zip code, based on disability. And a huge key in that process has been the federal role in public education. And so when we really think about what that federal role is that federal role has impacted every school in every community across the country, because it truly is an effort to make it the great equalizer. But what we have known and what we continue to see are things we're not surprised by. In Project 2025, right there it said they are going to eliminate the Department of Education. They talked about the importance of private school vouchers and taking the public tax dollars and giving them to unaccountable private schools. They talked about returning, quote unquote, education back to the states. And what we saw last week was the start of that all happening. We saw Secretary Linda McMahon confirmed on Monday and sends out a whole email to all the Department of Ed staff announcing this is their final mission. We see the insane cuts of almost half of the U.S. Department of Education staff. We saw complete obliteration of teams, and we can talk about, sure, we knew that the cuts were coming in our Office of Civil Rights, which predominantly protects children with disabilities to make sure that they are being served in our schools. But we also saw the biggest department that was cut was our student aid office, and the next day, the FAFSA went offline. It took 72 people on a Teams call to try to get the FAFSA line up and running in this critical time for parents as they try to figure out what they can afford to send their children to for higher education, and students across America are in that tough decision making. The cuts directly impacted a student's ability to know if they can go to school next year. We also saw the complete obliteration of the Office of English Language Acquisition. So already we're making it harder and harder for all of our students, no matter their zip code, to access our public education system. And this is one fight that this administration is picking with every single community in this country.
Yeah, that is such a powerful recap, Mary. Really appreciate your running through it. It's astonishing to see, on the one hand, Trump during the political campaign claiming he had nothing to do with Project 2025, running away from it. And then the second he wins, basically embracing key components of it and going beyond it in some ways in terms of the rapid destruction. I don't know if you know of any other significant country in the world, any other major developed country that does not have a national education office, that is basically, divesting from having a national commitment to public schools or to schools and education in those countries. This just seems like one of the most radical and destructive actions that Trump could take in terms of decimating not just the interests and rights of parents and children to schools, but also possibly harming a generation of kids through these actions. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit more about that context, how extraordinary these actions are, and as Alex asked, what the NEA and the teachers on the front lines and all the support personnel and others are doing about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Lisa. I mean, let's acknowledge the fact that in America, as opposed to many other industrialized countries, we have a much more decentralized education system. Truly, the education system in America, its federal role has been about equity. It has been about making sure that every student, no matter their background, has access to a public education. But let's take this from the community side. We know that our public schools in most of our communities are our largest employers. And so when we look at this, we look at, well, if you get rid of Title I funding for children in poverty, not only are class sizes going to go up, but we're going to lose a lot of teaching positions in our local schools. If you eliminate the Department of Education and the ability to provide services for students with disabilities, every community across the country is going to lose access to speech and language hearing therapy, is going to lose access to occupational therapy, is going to lose actual access to the additional time that student might need to reach their full potential. These are the actual cuts we're talking about. This is not about a big building in DC filled with quote unquote government bureaucrats, as they like to say. This is truly about eliminating the supports for my two boys. I have two boys in public schools in Virginia. This is about limiting the access that my youngest son has through his 504 in supports that he gets as part of his schooling. That's what's on the line here. This is personal for moms, for dads, for communities, for grandparents across the country. And it's time for us to stand up and do something. So this week, we are actually very excited to be partnering with groups, with the American Federation of Teachers, with parents, with faith leaders, with community organizations across the nation for a day of action on March 19th. We are asking the communities to gather with their educators and students and parents in their public schools and walk into those schools in support of the importance and vitality of our local public schools for our students and our communities.
Mary, thank you so much for leading this effort and for breaking it down in this way. What I love about this action is that it is empowering, right? It gives people something actionable to do, and it makes clear, it reminds us that democracy is not something that is a spectator sport that happens every 2 or 4 years when we go to the polls, that we can rely on our representatives in Congress to stand up for in the meantime, but requires our investment, it requires our direct action. And particularly in moments like these, and looking internationally, looking in our own country's history to when authoritarianism has risen, as it very clearly is now, the way to fight back against it is through this type of direct action, through finding common cause, across, I think too much has been made of this, but, urban rural divides. But as you point out, this is a destructive action that is going to affect people of all stripes, ideological stripes, political stripes, across racial and socioeconomic, landscapes in the suburbs, in rural communities, and in the cities. And it strikes me again. You mentioned that a big part about this agenda is sort of voucherization and the privatization of government. I think that's a theme that we're seeing throughout this kind of Dojification of the Trump 2.0. which is the handout of the American people's common weal to these billionaires and the deprivation of access to opportunity for everyday people. And that's what's happening here, right? I remember hearing last year on a panel about Project 2025 from a legislator down in Florida about exactly how this was playing out down there, where we already had sort of these laboratories of autocracy, these Project 2025 states, and the public school districts were being hollowed out in favor of effectively strip mall schools, where they were sticking kids in front of computers and just pressing play and calling that education. And that's what it will be unless people stand up, everyday people stand up through actions like the ones you're organizing this week. So tell our folks, how can they get involved? How can they get involved this week in this day of action? How can they get involved more broadly in the fight for public education in our future?
Yeah, and let's just really drive that down to why that matters. Is we know in every case of a backsliding democracy, the first area they go after is the education system, because they don't want people who have a full, robust education, who can think for themselves, who can do what needs to be done in a society. They know that often educators are the ones to have push back in a moment like this. So by silencing educators, by diminishing our public schools, this is exactly what they want to see happen in a backsliding democracy, so you can control more power at the top. And we know so much of this isn't just about power. It's about money. It's about tax cuts for billionaires. They want to eliminate the Department of Ed to give more tax cuts to billionaires. So this is all connected, and how everybody can get involved is we are urging everybody to go to NEA.org/March19, March19, NEA.org/March19. And it's going to have everything you need. We had over 150 events already registered as of this morning across the country. You can find an event near you. You can see a toolkit of how you can get and work and provide an opportunity for this sort of gathering to happen in your community. Maybe it's not right on the school property. Maybe it's across the street at a park. Maybe y'all are bringing donuts for everybody coming to work that day and coffee. But this is really an opportunity for communities across the country to step up and get involved, and to make sure that nobody is taking your public schools from you.
Yeah, that is so powerful. And it's March 19th. And Mary, I want to just ask you just quickly, like, what is inspiring you in this moment? What's driving you in this moment?
So, great question. And for those of you who can see, I wear a little hummingbird every single day. And this hummingbird was gifted to me by our incredible president, Larry Delaney of the Washington Education Association, back in September. And he told me the tale of the hummingbird, which is from the Squamish people of the Puget Sound. And in that tale, what we have is a forest fire. And the fire is burning through the forest, and all the animals are running out of the forest. And except for the hummingbird. And the hummingbird goes to the pond, gets a drop of water, drops it on the fire, goes back to the pond, gets another drop of water, drops it on the fire. Eventually, the animals look at the hummingbird and said, "What are you doing?" And that hummingbird looks back at the animals and says, "Everything I can." In this moment where everything can seem so overwhelming, we have to remember ourselves as the hummingbird. We have to remember that each and every day we're waking up and we're doing every single thing that we can. And while our one hummingbird may not be enough, when we gather with the millions of hummingbirds working in the same direction across the country, that is how we are going to create change. Every day, the 3 million hummingbirds of the National Education Association get up and to do good work for students across this country, no matter their zip code. And it is because of their work that we all need to be our own hummingbirds, to step up in support of our public schools, to keep our students on the trajectory of success from now into the future, and to recognize that our public schools in our country are worth fighting for.
Beautiful and powerful. Mary Kusler, thank you so much for joining us here on Legal AF with Court Accountability Action. We just hit 500,000 subscribers who I am sure will really be heartened by this message. Would love to have you back to keep us updated, both on these really terrifying attacks and on what the hummingbirds are doing to do what we can to fight back against it. Really honored to be in this fight alongside you, Mary. Until next time, signing out.
Absolutely. Thank you.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.